Attorney back. We are great. Welcome back to Senate Education. The reign of Senator Hewitt is just over temporarily, but I'm sure she will be back. So, in full force. Thank you. It was great. And Mr. Fisher, yes. So as Senator Hewitt mentioned, this has been a little bit of a it's a bit of a change here. As I recall, it was Senator Hewitt worked with Mr. Careless on this, and if you would bring us up to speed, that would be great. And this is your written testimony.
Yes, for the record, my name is Ted Fisher. I'm the agency's of education. Ted Fisher from the Vermont Agency of Education. I'm the agency's director of communications and legislative affairs. And usually I have that memorized. It's completely right, but today. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony S204. And
I'm sorry, just before we get started, I think we have a side-by-side somewhere. Is that true?
I think when this thing changed, and this will get this side by side.
Oh, okay. She's just not, so she's not going to today. Can you print up the side-by-side in case we need to at some point? But I think we're just taking testimony. Go ahead.
I appreciate the committee's indulgence and flexibility. And I know that you've heard from some of my colleagues, including the Director Careless, to give feedback on portions of this bill in the past. That it seemed like the right time for the agency to provide sort of top level feedback on the bill. And that would be ordinarily in the person of Secretary Boucher. However, some other things are happening in this building at the same time, so she found herself unable to come. Sorry, had a commitment elsewhere. So I am a poor deputy for her, but I will do my best to provide some feedback. And as you'll see at the top of my testimony, our formal official testimony in this draft comes from a review by our legal team, as well as by our policy unit of some of the provisions of this bill and by the secretary. So most of my comments will be related to one area, and it's not clear to us. There's some clarifying questions related to that, related to some of the provisions and inclusion of independent schools in some of the provisions. Assuming would love to clarify intent there, whether that was to include them generally in some of the policy provisions that are referenced in the bill, or whether perhaps they were just included out of an intent to a wish to have them covering literacy. We want to just flag some questions related to that.
Thank you. Do you mind?
Please, yeah, jump in.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher, for being here. Just for clarity, are you commenting on the original bill or on the edits that were worked up? So which would be draft 1.1?
I'm commenting on draft 1.1.
Thank you.
I know that the reference was made to a side-by-side. That side-by-side was shared with us. So I think that's where we started from. We also looked at, I know you have a clean version on the website and on your website. And so when I reference line numbers here, I'm referencing the clean version, your side by side, as they traditionally have line numbers. So line numbers are in your draft 1.1 version there. Appreciate you asking that, because as you all know, you're very skilled with these documents, and I'm always fumbling. So
No, thank you.
So in any case, so we have some questions about some of the previous provisions that are specifically applied to approved independent schools. And there's one place here where I'll do my best to get into the nitty gritty of some of the Rule Series 2200 work. But briefly, there's basically two areas where independent schools are covered, and they're actually two different sections. But in section 1B1 on page 2, line 2, for reference, the bottom section of the first page of my testimony.
And sorry, can I interrupt? Sorry.
Of course.
Can you go slowly?
Yes.
So
Yes.
this will
Sorry.
be a lot to very fast.
Of course.
Thank you.
And I tend to run fast a little bit, and I want to be conscious of the committee's time.
Well, I think Senator Hewitt makes a good point. I mean, we've got people coming in, but we can always postpone a little bit to go slowly.
Awesome.
It is complicated stuff.
And I actually don't have 1.1 in front of me, so if I might have to phone friend and Senator Christine here if necessary. But on section, so firstly, there are a couple of sections of the bill are subsections of section 1 of the bill that seem to apply approved independent schools to local comprehensive assessment or local comprehensive assessment systems and the education quality standards, or otherwise known as EQS. And I have a copy of EQS here in case we want to look at the provision on local comprehensive assessments. So the first place where this happens is section 1D, subsection 1, or subdivision 1, excuse me, on page 2, line 2. It requires the agency to annually include a list of reviewed universal reading screeners and assessments for dyslexia and guidance and technical assistance on local comprehensive assessment systems issued to supervisory unions and approved independent schools. And then again, a similar construct appears again on page 4, line 6. That's subsection D, where the education quality standards are included in a provision requiring public and approved independent schools to follow AOE guidance on a range of different state and federal statutes and requirements.
Yeah, please, Senator Shear.
Thank you. This is actually something I wanted to touch on. Unfortunately, I don't have my notes with me, but I did have a conversation with a group of approved independent schools in my district on Monday, and I don't want to butcher what some of the concerns that they shared with me, so I'm just trying to remember it as best as I can. But part of the concern here, I believe, is that if this were to be enacted, these independent schools would then also have to report to multiple superintendents. Is that one of the issues that?
No, I'm not sure about that. But actually, if you switch to the top of page 2 of my testimony, so I just say at the bottom of page 1, inclusion of the term independent schools in both these provisions makes them very complex. And we were just requesting clarity on legislative intent for these 2 items. I give you, there's 2 reasons for that. So for EQS and LCAS, our question is whether the intent is to require approved independent schools to comply with the EQS and maintain an LCAS. And if so, further amendment related to 16 VSA section 165 is needed because it does not require or does not currently apply any EQS requirements to improve independent schools. And LCAS is just one of the rules in the EQS series 2000. So I'm not sure. I might have to come back to you with how does it work in the dynamics of an SU, but for right now, the rule system in the EQS doesn't apply to approved independent schools. And this actually the state board hit upon this when they were dealing with the Act 1 work. Because of the way statute is written, EQS doesn't apply to approved independent schools. And this is probably something we should have flagged in 2019 when we passed Act 1. That's Ted's personal opinion. In that, like, if we had noticed that and put in a slightly different provision, it would have essentially the state board looked at it because the law says update EQS for public and approved independent schools. The board looked at it and said, okay, statute, like under statute, EQS does not apply to the independent schools. So what the board's response on Act 1 was engage in independent school making, which they are. And it's my understanding, I haven't heard any updates in the last couple of months because I've been hanging out with y'all, but my understanding is that they're engaged in that rulemaking in order to review independent school rules and see where they can kind of come into conformance with the Act 1 working group's recommendations.
Senator Taylor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I can speak to legislative intent, which is that the whole notion for this bill came to me from a parent whose child had been at an independent, approved independent school and was not flagged as being dyslexic until she was removed from that school and sent somewhere else. And so that was priority for me when I was thinking about this. So, and I hear your concerns. Do you suggest language in here that could remedy the issues?
We don't. I feel like we've come to one of these, like, it's a decision tree flow chart. We've come to a fork in the road. Through you, Mr. Chair, and I think Madam Vice Chair as the proponent, whichever you would prefer, I can go over a couple of similar clarifying questions and then jump down to AOE's sort of perspective on this. Or I could jump down there and then we can come back. Would you prefer that I just run through a couple of other items
Yeah, I was
first?
thinking that we can have some questions.
We can run, yeah, and
I mean, I just wanna, the original bill though didn't have EQS in it, is that correct? I mean, I don't think it did, because looking at some of the sponsors, but you correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Pruitt, please.
That could have been something that was added, but either way, the intent is for every child in the state to get screened for reading deficiencies between ages of K through, or grade K through 3, regardless of where they are, so however we can achieve that would be fantastic.
I
And help us
Not
also
print.
related to that. I mean, I could be wrong, of course, we all have our vote. I'm not interested personally in opening up the EQS thing altogether. So I think, I don't know if there's a way to sort of,
You just jumped us to the part of the flow chart where I talked about AOE is just flagging that we're treading into a broader debate on independent schools here. And we just wanted to note that as a concern and say that probably that'd be something that may be up for more deliberation if that's the way the committee wants to go. And AOE would be happy to participate in that debate. We're not prepared to necessarily engage in that today.
Okay, sorry, one
No,
more
please.
time, and then I'll stop talking.
But you did ask a question I want to come back to.
For it not be called debate, because it should be a different.
Understood.
It should be a
Thank you.
conversation, thank you.
That was a, and I try to avoid those kind of blurred terms myself, so I appreciate that. I think
discussion.
the committee may want to take additional testimony or engage in further deliberations before engaging in policy changes. Today, we welcome an opportunity to be part of that conversation. It's the committee's desire. So yes, we're just concerned that we're going in that direction by making some additional changes that would probably be necessary to include those. And I'm now at a disadvantage because I did not print draft 1.1. Would it be possible to
Yes, you can
borrow?
look at.
Thank you, Senator.
You can look.
So, and again, this may be a good question, for legislative counsel, because I am not skilled in, or certainly not as skilled in these matters, and also not an attorney.
Ted, may I just say something, because I don't mean this in any way disrespectful at all, but I want to make sure the agency is giving us what the agency wants. Seems like there are a lot of questions,
Yes,
and I'm looking at the committee chair, I mean, we can keep going, totally fine. Are these, I just want you to be able to answer all the questions that we're going to have, and you're not, so that's my only thing.
so if you wanted to, so we, and I appreciate that.
You are the
wishy-washiness.
representing the agency, right?
Yes,
And anything where people are watching and they're like, well, this is what they're sending, like, I just
Right.
want you to be, I want you to be comfortable.
I'm comfortable, but I'm also leaning into some uncertainty here,
Sure.
which is just what the intent was, and so to come back to your statement of intent a moment ago, Madam Vice Chair, is that let's just look at B1, so bottom of page 1 onto page 2. So it says annually, the Agency of Education shall include a list of reviewed universal reading screeners and assessments used in the identification of dyslexia characteristics and the guidance and technical assistance issues related to local comprehensive assessment systems for use by supervisory unions and independent schools here. The question that we have and the concern that we flag is that local comprehensive assessment systems applies to one party in that provision and not the other. So if you wanted to just make sure that universal screening was required, you could delete local comprehensive assessment systems from line 1, and that would be a more general requirement on the agency. If you wanted to ensure that the AOE's guidance related to local comprehensive assessment systems, specifically for supervisory unions, was included in the bill, that would be some legislative jujitsu that probably Beth can better weigh in on than I am, because it might require, than I could. This might require a different subdivision.
Could you repeat that last bit one more time? If we are to keep the local comprehensive assessment systems in there and require it for both supervisory unions and approved independent schools, it's gonna take some legal wrangling, is what I'm hearing.
But I think you are, it sounds like inadvertently applying local comprehensive assessment systems to independent schools.
Okay.
But local comprehensive assessment systems are part of a series of rules that currently don't apply to independent schools, and that's where the problem comes in,
Okay,
right?
yeah, this is a working
That's very
document, so it's definitely in play.
So that happens again, and again, Senator, I appreciate you allowing me to borrow your paper here. That again happens in a series, a listed series, AOE guidance related to multi-tiered system of supports and education support teams, section 504, and then there's a series of requirements and education quality standards is there on line 6 at the top of the page. So that's item 1. And then item 2 is actually in that same section on the top of page 4 is multi-tiered systems of supports and education support teams. Those are, and I'm now referring back to my testimony on page 2, those are a requirement of 16 VSA section 2902. And the current law, approved independent schools, whether approved for public tuition or not, are not required to have an MTSS or ESTs. So it's the same kind of.
Can you revision MTSS?
Well,
Oh, multiple tier. Okay, thank you. There it is. Please continue, Ted.
So those are the 2 items related to independent schools. We do note, and this is again that sort of policy conversation, I just wanted to note, I sort of generally referenced my general comment about this, we're coming close to a broader conversation about independent schools. So there are some other sections, for example, section 1E, which is on the top of page 5, where the requirements apply to both public and independent schools. And we just wanted to flag that that does get into a debate about what requirements apply.
Discussion.
Excuse me, thank you. I made that mistake twice. It opens up a conversation about what requirements apply to independent schools, and I understand that's part of the intent. It's worth just flagging, and it's you'll find, and I recognize we're jumping around here. Item 2 on the list on the top of my testimony on page 2, we have a definitional issue with approved independent schools. So the Title 16 definition of approved independent schools just outlines the state board process for definition. Depending on whether you want approved independent schools as referenced the law to be the approved independent schools that are eligible for public tuition under Rule Series 2200, that's a different definition than just approved independent schools generally. And so I just wanted to flag that for you as well. As a matter of Title 16, there's no definition in terms of the eligibility to receive public tuition. And then using the words approved independent school that intends to receive public tuition would be more clear. So depending on whether or not you want to include all approved independent schools or just ones that intend to receive public tuition. That's a
Where's that?
suggestion. In item number 2 of my testimony on the top of page 2, where it says definition of approved independent schools.
Okay.
And this is a sort of a word.
Top of page 2.
So of my testimony.
Your testimony.
So approved independent school that intends to receive public tuition. We have 2 categories in law, but sort of a third category under rules, because you can be an approved independent school that doesn't want to meet all the requirements or decides not to meet all the requirements in Rule 2200 to receive public tuition, which kind of, you're still an approved independent school, but you don't meet all those benchmarks to accept public tuition dollars.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Senator.
So depending on what decision you want to do in terms of applying it to all all approved independent schools, or just a subset that receive public tuition, we suggest if you want to use that smaller group.
My eyes were glaring over, frankly, this.
I know, I'm
No.
sorry.
No, it's okay. So I actually have a question that's not totally on topic, but this moment in time is bringing me here. Do you have documentation on how much it costs the state in lawyer fees and in AOE time and resources to navigate this system, this dual system of school systems that we have in the state? Cause sometimes the dollar signs start just showing up. Cause I mean, I'm just hearing you, like, we had to talk to ledge council about this definition and that definition, and then the AOE had to do this and that, and it just seems like maybe hundreds and hundreds of hours of administrative costs. And I'm just curious, just as a question that just popped into my mind.
I don't know the answer to that. Knowing what I know about just sort of how we track costs internally, I'm gonna guess that it's probably hard to disaggregate that from other, so for example, just since we're on this sort of sidebar here, many AOE employees are paid out of certain funds. So for example, my salary is fully paid out of federal indirects. So that's the money the federal government says, hey, every state education agency needs a communications director, right? So that's what federal indirects are for. But for example, like our tobacco and substance prevention coordinator is paid out of federal tobacco funding, right? And as you get, hear from us on our budget, you'll see, we have a Title I coordinator who's paid out of that administrative set aside.
But to Senator Dula's question, couldn't you just look at legal, I mean, maybe just.
I'll say
line-
selfishly, from my perspective, I would love to have be able to generate a cost estimate, because we don't do appropriations for individual requirements. I'd love to be able to give you all an estimate of how much it costs us to do a legislative report. That's my own selfish thing, because we add a lot of legislative reports every year, and it's a significant burden. As you know, we sometimes fail to be able to deliver them all because of it. And I would love to be able to do that. We're not set up to do it internally. It's always been like a summer project I've wanted to do. But what the answer is that we have a legal, we part of our task and charge as a state government agency is to navigate bodies of rules, to navigate state law, to interpret state law. So we have a legal team for whom these matters are their job. And then we also have subject matter experts who may or may not be attorneys, who work in other sections of the agency, for whom understanding the rules that pertain to their agency, whether it's state or federal rules or laws, they're highly skilled at that. So I would say that, we don't have that cost. It is an interesting question, but I also say, it's going to be part of our job, regardless of the construct we're in, if that makes sense, right?
I
It's to kind of
get
answer
it,
this
and
question.
I appreciate your response. We have this conversation in health and welfare today too, and times are tight. Time to look at line items and time to look at, every.
Certainly clarity is always helpful.
That we incur, and is that the right word, every time we make a decision?
Certainly clarity is often helpful,
Yeah.
because we do spend quite a bit of time trying to understand legislative intent. So my job, once you all adjourn, is to spend the next month, Lindsay and I, essentially documenting everything you've done. We search every single bill you pass, not just the bills related to education that we know about, every single bill you pass, to make sure that one of your colleagues in another committee didn't slip something that you guys never got and we didn't pick up on, so that we don't miss something.
Right, legislative intent is that we just want all kids to read regardless of what niche you're in.
Right, so I think in terms of where you want to fall down on the policy, if you want all independent schools that are approved by the State Board of Education, use approved independent schools. If you want to tighten it up to the public tuition schools, you have a wordier definition that makes it clearer for us in terms of what your intent is.
So it'll be a little easier if we do that. Okay, thank you.
So we are coming to the end of our journey. Unless there are any questions about independent schools or some of those clarifying things, we have two more points that I wanted to quickly cover. So at the bottom of page 2, additional feedback. In section 1F on page 5, line 6, thank you, Senator Williams again. This is the subsection. This is the parents and kindergarten through grades 3 student who exhibits a reading deficit anytime. This is about written parental notification. And just without getting into the details, particularly because I'm an imperfect vessel on that, there are notification requirements under ITEA and section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that are enshrined there. And so we are just interested, to your point a moment ago in your question, Madam Vice Chair, in making sure that those align. So one way to attack this differently that would probably make AOE, probably would make AOE more comfortable, would be to require us to establish a notification plan or process that's consistent with already existing requirements in federal law and reflects your legislative intent. And then the last item, if we flip to the top of page 3, is just that while we agree with the committee, just speaking more generally about universal screening, that we'll agree with the committee that universal screening is important. I just wanted to take this opportunity to flag and signpost will be a significant lift for both AOE and the field, and some additional conversation and deliberation on implementation would be important and we'll be happy to participate in that.
Any questions for Ted? Yeah, please.
Thank you. Would you want to have that implementation deliberation? You want that in this bill, you don't want that to be like a separate bill, I assume, so you want to have this conversation.
I think so, yes.
Okay.
And I understand that, time is tight to move. I'm not sure, and I can follow up with Secretary Boucher in terms of whether we have other questions about it. I also just think it may be one of these things where, and there's different ways to attack it, right? But it may be one of these things where you want a report back or something like that, or even just like thinking about your effective dates in terms of giving the field time to prepare. That's something we thought very carefully about when we did our CTE work, to the point where I was talking to multiple people in the agency. Like, I need to know what day, like what day of the year is best, and it's going to and it's about like that synthesis. So like, what day of the year is best for our finance team because it helps, like it works in the school district and CTE budgeting process that already exists, and what's right for data collection. So those kind of things are worth thinking about. It's, we're not explicitly saying we need funding necessarily, but it's worth thinking about whether or not, if you want to have an implementation year out could be one thing. It might be worth asking some school districts about, what they would be interested in doing. We did include, in our companion bill to this on literacy, we did have some effective dates there that we actually had to adjust in part because we didn't set them with enough foresight as we were trying to prepare for the session. So I guess I'm just really saying that there is devils in some of those details, and it might be worth thinking about that. I understand that the intent is to move quickly on this, and the need is really clear. But we have seen, as we've made policy, even just in the time that I've been here, that we often come back and say, oh, okay, things are not moving as quickly as possible, or as we intended, or something like that.
I totally agree with you, and I really appreciate that. If you could give me or us some specifics on what
Absolutely.
the problems would be, or what the difficulties of the implementation would be, that would be very helpful, because I really see this as working really nicely with the bill that you all proposed. I think the two kind of go hand in hand, so if you could give us specifics.
And maybe actually, and I recognize that draft 1.1 does not have any of the AOE recommended ones, but maybe we can come back to you with how do we synthesize the two and see how they work together.
Might be, if you're willing, a conversation with you and AOB.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, no, I don't mind.
Something like that, and then we kind of cut through some of this other stuff.
Putting both bills together into a.
Yeah, no, I think we'll put it all,
Universe.
yeah, it's gonna be a super happy universe, but, anything else, Ted?
That's it. I
Okay,
appreciate
thank
the
you.
committee's time.
Thank you.
Thank you. One big universe.
Excellent.
That's a nice.
Somewhere. So I give you back your copy.
Yep, you did.
Okay.
People don't,
Thank you.
so they can't hear us.